Hey there, and welcome back to Luke in the Library. Today is very special because I'm making a late video for my 15 favorite books in 2025 now that that year has wrapped up. So let's get started right into it. First, let's get started with some honorable mentions. These are books that either barely didn't make it into the list or barely didn't count for the list. First up is As I Lay Dying. I really enjoyed As I Lay Dying. Unlike The Sound of the Fury, which I just really couldn't find how to love that one. I enjoyed it for the most part, but I didn't love The Sound of the Fury, and I thought that the confusing nature of it really didn't work to the advantage of the book, unlike Ulysses, where I think the confusing nature of it actually helped the book. Kind of like a Christopher Nolan movie, if that makes any sense. How, like, sometimes he uses the confusing nature of it to enhance the movie, or he uses a weird timeline to enhance the movie. I feel like that did not happen in The Sound of the Fury like it did in Ulysses. The next up on my honorable mentions is Dubliners by James Joyce. This book had some of the short stories in this book I absolutely adored, one of which being The Dead. It's one of my favorite short stories to this point, but some of the short stories I really didn't care for, and some of the short stories, they were just there. I also, on my honorable mentions, is Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. Obviously, this doesn't count for my favorite book list because it's just a short story, but it is possibly my favorite short story I've ever read, and it's just incredible. You have to check that one out. It's only like 5 pages long. So, I also really enjoyed Pierre Menard, the author of Don Quixote by Jorge Luis Borges. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but yeah. This, like many other short stories by Borges, was just way over my head, but for the most part, I enjoyed it, and I think I even enjoyed it more than The Library of Babel by him. But obviously, that is also just a short story, so it can't count for this list. The other 2 books that didn't count for this list, or not didn't count, but they just didn't make it onto the list because there was more that I enjoyed more than them, is Faust by Goethe. I really enjoyed Faust Part 1, and I found it one of the most influential books in my life. But Faust Part 2 was just there, and I didn't even read a fully translated version of Faust Part 2. It was extremely strange, and I didn't really get the whole point of it. Now, the other book that didn't make it onto this list that I really enjoyed was Tristram Shandy by Laurence Sterne. I loved this book. It was so funny. It was hilarious. And it was one of the strangest told stories I've ever heard. I really love it when an author can play with a gimmick in their book and try to find a strange way to tell it. And Tristram Shandy is just that. It might be the most interestingly told story I've ever heard. And starting up on our list, we have number 15, Ulysses by James Joyce. I know I had mentioned this one before. And as a book that could really play with gimmicks, this book is possibly the weirdest book I've ever read, up there with Tristram Shandy. And I believe that Laurence Sterne walked so that James Joyce could run with this novel. If you could even consider it a novel. I'm just going to tell you guys some of my favorite stories from Ulysses. My number 1 favorite story is Scylla and Charybdis, where Stephen Dedalus tells his famous theory on Hamlet that he himself doesn't even believe in. I love Sirens, which is the strangest told part in all of Ulysses, I believe, where he makes a orchestra of random noises, including farts and other random James Joyce nonsense. And the book is supposedly the greatest novel of all time, and it's up there for me, but obviously, personally, I didn't enjoy it the very most, because to me, it's only a top 15. I mean, to me, this is my 15th favorite of just last year, so I didn't love it, but my experience with it was not nearly as negative as other people have had. Number 14 for me is possibly one of the most funny reading experiences I've ever had. I made sure I read this one at the park, because that sounded like the right place to read it, is outdoors. It's Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, and I read some passages of this to my dad, and he really hated it. And I can understand hating this, because to me, it might be one of the most annoying books to read. It definitely is annoying, but I thought it was brilliant. I absolutely loved its simplistic story, and I absolutely loved trying to draw conclusions of what it actually meant myself, and I definitely love the way it was told. It's annoying, and it's funny, and I loved every second of it. Number 13, we have Twelfth Night by William Shakespeare. I read this one not too recently. It was pretty early in 2025, so I couldn't tell you much about it, except for the fact that it is one of the most cruel Shakespeare plays I've ever read, possibly more cruel than some of his tragedies, and the fact that I absolutely adore Feste the Fool. I liked him almost as much as I liked the Fool in King Lear, which is one of my top 20 favorite books ever. This book was absolutely amazing, but it's not my favorite of his comedies, and certainly not one of my favorite plays of his. But just like all Shakespeare, it has to be highly ranked on my list because I love Shakespeare. Number 12, I believe, is Dune Messiah. It's more like an epilogue than a sequel to Dune, and Dune is one of my favorite books ever. I didn't love it as much as I loved the original Dune, but I thought it was quite incredible, and I love it focused more on the girl characters in Dune, Chani, Princess Cerulean, and I had a great time. I read it in 2 days, and then I kind of went back and I read more of it because I think I missed a lot of stuff when I just plowed through it like that. Or one day, yeah. But I had a great time. I highly recommend this one if you enjoyed the first Dune book, which I certainly did. Number 11 is yet another comedy by Shakespeare, and it is A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is the most complicated and amazing love story I think I've ever heard or read, and I love the characters so much in this one. Robin Goodfellow was definitely my favorite. I adored every second he was on there, the mischief that he created. He was incredible, and yeah, highly recommend this comedy, even better than 12th Night. Number 10, we're getting into the top 10 now of 2025, and this is the book that I was the most surprised with how much I loved it. It was The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I read this in, I think it was like 3 days or something. It's like almost 500 pages, and this was an emotional roller coaster, this book. As you can see, I marked up a ton of the pages. I love the narration style on this book, narrated by Death. And, sorry, this story, I get emotional thinking about this story. It's one of the most emotional books I've ever read. It's one of the saddest books I've ever read. And it's definitely one of my most enjoyable reading experiences ever. 9 is yet another Dune book. It is Children of Dune by Frank Herbert. And this book was significantly more entertaining than Dune Messiah was. Almost as entertaining as the original. When I was about halfway through this book, I was considering whether this was better than the original or whether this could make my top 10 favorite books ever. And the end of it was incredible. I love the transformation of the character Leto. I love the introduction of the character Leto. And he's one of my favorite characters ever. Like, period. Him, Paul Atreides, Duncan Idaho. These are some of the characters that will be with me forever, just like Jean Valjean was when I read Les Mis. Number 8 is a very short, I don't have it with me right now, sorry. It's Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And this book is about finding the meaning of life. And he's Buddhist, I believe, and he becomes a Shaolin monk. And he starts off his life full of discipline. He's a bright boy, he's extremely smart, he's extremely calm, he's extremely humble. And he starts off his life, he becomes a monk. And he devotes his life to that, and he's incredibly talented at that. He learns discipline, he learns how to deal with hunger, he learns how to deal with thirst, but he can't find meaning through that. He goes out, he explores different paths in his life. He explores consumerism, he tries to find meaning through that. He explores nature, and the whole book is just this man who tries to find the meaning of life, and it is one of the greatest books I've ever read. It's one of my dad's favorite books. I love Siddhartha, and I love Hermann Hesse's writing so much. Number 7 on my list is The Tempest by William Shakespeare. It's the last comedy I read last year. I love the character of Prospero so much. I loved Caliban, the sea monster. I loved everything about this book. I read it in a single day. I think at one point I had read 7 Shakespeare plays in 7 days, and that's one of my favorite experiences ever. I said before, I love Shakespeare. This is in my top 5 Shakespeare plays, definitely. And I'll probably return to this one in the near future just because I love it that much. Number 6 on my list, I've also misplaced. It's The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I loved Inferno. That's one of my favorite passages in books, I think, ever. And I enjoyed Purgatorio more than I expected, and I adored Paradiso. I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of these right, but I don't think there is a single more beautifully written thing ever than the Paradiso section in the Divine Comedy, with the different realms of heaven. And Inferno obviously is incredible. Many people read Inferno without reading the rest of it. I would recommend reading the whole rest of it, but obviously Inferno is the best of them. Number 5 on my list is one that I could consider to be the greatest story ever told, and that's the Odyssey by Homer. I have not read the Iliad. I'm like halfway through the Iliad right now, but I've never read it. I just went straight to the Odyssey because I'm very excited for the new movie coming out in summer. So I made sure I got enough time to read the Odyssey. So I read this one, and I liked it so much more than I was expecting. All these epics I read last year have exceeded my expectations by like tons. Alright? And also, I feel like the timeline of the Odyssey was more complex than I thought it would be. And I definitely enjoyed that. I like it when authors mess around with time. I like when they mess around with their storytelling techniques, and I love that. The Odyssey was a blast. I loved every second of it. My number 4 is what I consider to be one of the greatest books ever written, and one of the greatest sci-fi books ever written for sure. It is God, Emperor of Dune. This is about Leto, who, after his transformation in Children of Dune, I don't know if I can say it. It's not much of a spoiler. I think most people know that. It's not a huge spoiler, I don't think. But it's after his transformation that he partakes in Children of Dune. And it's about his hideous reign over everyone. And I think he's one of the greatest characters because he's so tragic. Everybody thinks what he does is for his own gain. And everybody hates him. Every single person hates him because he does the most horrendous and horrible stuff, including slavery and all these other things. But he's doing all that he can for the good of mankind and to save them from their destruction in the future. Next up, number 3, Macbeth by William Shakespeare. This is the most entertaining book I've ever read by Shakespeare. It is one of the shortest books by Shakespeare. It is absolutely incredible. It's about the ambition and, it's about the ambition of Macbeth and the persuasiveness of Lady Macbeth. It's about manipulation. It's about political intrigue. And it's one of the most incredible books I've ever read. It's the same sort of vibe to me as The Three Musketeers was, where it's just absolute fun through and through. I loved every second of this book, and I'd recommend it to literally anybody. This is what I believe to be the gateway to Shakespeare. I believe that you should start with Macbeth, and then once you're completely trapped in the Shakespearean world, you need to go on to Hamlet and King Lear, read the greats. They're less entertaining, but they're definitely greater books. My number 2 of last year is my 6th favorite book of all time. It is Paradise Lost. This book I was not excited for in the slightest. I thought this book was going to be a trek to get through. My copy is over 400 pages of thick verse, nearly impenetrable verse. I believe this was written in the 1500s or 1600s. And it's harder to understand than I thought it would be, is what I thought when I first started reading it. I was not excited for this in the slightest, but I ended up loving this more than any other epic I've ever read. I think out of the great 4 epics, the Aeneid, the Odyssey, the Iliad, and Paradise Lost, and the Divine Comedy probably, this is what I believe to be the best. This is my favorite ever, one of my favorite stories ever written. I loved every second. I can't tell you enough how much I recommend this book. There's not much else to say about it except for that. Now, my number 1 of 2025. Out of all of the 41 books I read last year, that feels like a lot to me. I know to some people out there, it doesn't really seem like a lot, but 41 books to me is a really good amount. My number 1 of all of those was Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. This is my 3rd favorite book I've ever read, only behind Watership Down and Les Miserables. This book is incredible. It's about 1,000 pages, but you don't get tired of it almost ever. I know about halfway through, I was starting to get tired of it. And I felt really bad for starting to get tired of it because of how much I was liking it. But about 500 pages through it, and I was tired. I didn't know what to do. But the more I pushed through it, the more I just absolutely loved it. It is more broken up into stories, or almost like, not journal entries, but more like just broken up into, the chapters are more like little short stories of the adventures of Don Quixote. And I loved every second of it. I love the story of the windmills. I love the story of the Helm of Mambrino. I loved the Tale of the Lions. I loved the Knight of the Wood. I loved every second of this book. And I am going to be reading this copy again and again throughout my life. I'm going to try another translation. I have the Rutherford translation here. I read the Edith Grossman translation. And I'm so excited to get into this book again. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time in Luke in the Library. Goodbye.